The secret of the Cunsey Nuke will perhaps never be completely known. All I can do is give you a little theory of my own, in that it was a place where money was coined. It's the maps that tell us. Oh, as you see, very, very narrow lawn. That's the Cunsey Nuke. There are lost buildings here. Difficult to say what was here actually, but this was an area, the Dean's Wine, and it was Chambers Institute, before it became Queensberry House, was known as the Dean's House. The Dean in question, historians often think that it was connected to the Cross Kirk. I disagree. The Dean in question was the Dean of Old St Andrews, which was you could say, the big church in Peebles in the medieval time. And in fact, the old poem, the Three Priests of Peebles, it can be well established that the Three Priests of Peebles were priests from Old St Andrews, because there was 11 altars at Old St Andrews. The Dean's House, almost certainly, you could be said, was the Chambers Institute, and it would have looked a bit like that, but maybe older. It was maybe, in the medieval times, it may have been timber fronted. Right across this road was a big gutter called the Dean's Gutter, and it's still marked on old maps, the Dean's Gutter, and that was exactly between the entrance to the Dean's House and this important thoroughfare, the Dean's Wine, which led down the Brigget, through Biggs Now, and up to Old St Andrews at the top of the old town. That was a much more important route in those days than it is now, believe you me. In fact, it was an old Roman road. If you go right to the back of Scott Brothers' house, I daren't take you in there because the customers wouldn't be able to move. But I'm telling you, anyone who hasn't looked at this, keep that in your mind. Go to Scott Brothers, go right to the back of the shop, right to the back, and you're on the cobbles.
I saw that.
Yeah. You're on the cobbles.
Mm-hmm. They look beautiful.
This is the top of these buildings. That one to the right, before the modern monstrosity top was put in, and the one to the left. And that's the tops of them. This is important because Sir Colburn had a school, one of the little schools that peppered Peebles in the pre-big school day. That house could go back to the late 18th century, but at one time it was just one. But the casual houses were the successors to the old medieval almshouses, which dotted every old town, and these almshouses were for the hospitalisation of sick people or the accommodation of pilgrims who were on their way to St Andrews or the Cross Kirk, and so the casual houses sort of stepped in as that after the Reformation, where they became more the haunts of vagrants. And the county councils kept a record of these people, actually kept a record of their names. And there's one name that survives from the casual house of the Brigade, and that is a lady, an itinerant lady, and she was known as Boadicea McFarlane. Quite amazing, and that name survives, and we don't know what she looked like, nothing about her, all we remember is her name. And it was down on the list. Boadicea McFarlane. God knows what kind of a person she was, but she would have been quite a character, to say the very least.
How old was that place then?
In its oldest form, I would say yes. It would go back to the late 18th century, in my view. So the Bairnkin would have been a smaller example of the East Wart, which dominated the Eastgate. Similar building stood across here with a gate through it. The entrance to the Brigade was much narrower. You can see from this picture. Look at that tiny wee bridge, the tree bridge, which was washed away by a flood in 1891. And, and this whole street was a centre of the weavers. It was a pub, the Old Red Lion, and it's nice that this house has survived with a few little alterations. That would be its original termination. Yeah. Those two brothers did, Robert and William Chambers. Incredible what they achieved, and only because their father went out of business. Our remains underneath the old courthouse. It was a very liberal prison, judging by the chroniclers of the 19th century. Very liberal. Apparently the prisoners often quarrelled, had a row, and the jailer would threaten them. He would say, "Keep it this and you're out. You can get back to your homes." This is unbelievable, but they were threatened. That was the worst threat you could deliver to a local prisoner in Peebles. Here's a view up Elker Street Brae. You can see the slight differences. This is 1895, this picture. It was built in the early 1890s. And there's little differences. That building over there, which now has a second story, was once a single level building. I'm going to take you even further back from this photograph, 60 years. And you'll have difficulty perhaps recognising the scene that meets your eyes. We're still looking up what is now Elker Street Brae, but as you can see, there are slight differences. 60 years, yes, back to 1830. Because in those days there were no pavements. No pavements. Pavements were only laid in 1846. And so you have the cobbled streets right up to the entrances to buildings. But that gives you an idea how far back it goes. But it goes back to the middle 18th century. It's been renovated more than once. It's been well taken care of, and it's you know, I'm proud to have that building here. I really am, you know. The 16th century, 17th century and 18th century boroughs of Peebles played bowls behind what is now the church. The Cuddy Bridge would have, in the days of the castle, it was a very steep area. Very, very steep. It's like a ravine, in fact. There was a dry ditch there. The castle fortifications were there. But after the castle disappeared, I believe that they put a wooden bridge over there. But the proper stone bridge actually wasn't built until 1815, believe it or not. 1815 was the time when the first really good stout stone bridge was built over the Cuddy. Before that time, the main way, as you know, was round, big as now, up the Briggate and round into the street that way, or out of the town. And if once you get that into perspective, then you can get an idea of the anatomy of medieval Peebles. This is Hayes Lawn. We're stopping here because Hayes Lawn is ancient, very, very ancient. It goes back centuries.
That was 19 bridges.
No, we're all right. That's a memorial to William Chambers, who was responsible for restoring the tower of St Andrews. It was some have criticised Chambers' restoration, thinking that it was a bit too drastic, but if he hadn't done it, it would be an even worse. I declare myself fairly happy with what Chambers did. Otherwise the tower could have been in a much worse state of ruin, you know, by the time. So Chambers was a Victorian, and the Victorians loved to be drastic. 6th century AD, when St Mungo was reputed to have created a small cell, or it might even have been a munter, which was the name of a collection of beehive huts which housed the clerics of his day. clerics of the Church of the Britons and Picts, not the Church of Columba. Forget Columba. Absolute swine, because he was responsible for burning the Borders Abbeys. He was an absolute vandal, a vile creature, a typical liegeman of Fat Henry. And he was up here, and he sacked this church in 1548-49, Hertford, and he sacked the church. And the people of Peebles were so traumatized by what happened to their glorious church that they never worshipped in it again. They hadn't the heart to restore it. They were so traumatized, and this was very close to the Reformation. And what they did was they made the Cross Kirk their church. Stands a kirk in Peebles Toon. St Andrews is its name. And Il Cawan frae toon and lan, the saint's prayer he can claim. For it owns there 12 altars fair. You can see some of the altars in that picture. 12 altars fair, a provost and prebends too, and a choir of boys with tuneful voice, in plain sang good and true. St John and lusty Christopher, St Lawrence and St James, Peter and Paul protect us all, St Andrew keep our hames. Sanct Mary of childbirth, guard our wives, Sanct Mary Major from guile, ourselves now guide, for us to provide. St Mary of Geddes Isle, O blessed St Martin, hear our prayer. St Michael save our soul, and the Holy Rood grant every good, and gie us grace to thole. Because the High Street of Peebles was known as High Gate, because Gate, G-A-I-T, was the old term for street or road anyway. And this was also known as High Gate, but it was the ecclesiastical High Gate. This building, which was the first railway station in Peebles, that you can see on that picture, that's an old Belton procession.
Yes.
And we're looking right down 1855, the first railway. That was even here before the Caledonian. Northgate came along here, straight out here, up that hill, and before the turnpike was built along there. Later, when Redeem Park Station was built in 1880s, it was transferred from down there up to there. A nicely decorated hump. But at one time it was a very important bridge, and that's when traffic was two ways in and out of the Northgate, because there was nowhere else for traffic to go, because the railway dominated that area. So Peebles, ancient Peebles stank, and it was mainly because of tanneries. They were everywhere. There was about 3 or 4 in the Northgate. Those houses are there, 99, 101, 103 and 105 Northgate, were once the gardens of a big mansion called Strawberry Hall. And it's not one I've managed to draw in a reconstruction yet, but I'm going to remnants of the town wall in that brick monstrosity you can see at the foot.
That's big.
Yeah. And bits of it here, bits of it here that have been restored, bits have been restored. Essentially that's the town wall. That's right, right. That's how the entrance to the Cross Keys looked a couple of 100 years ago. Mr. Archer, he came here about 1830. The building, as you see it, goes back to the late 16th. But there was a building before the Cross Keys, which has long since disappeared, which was owned by the monastery of Arbroath. It was the hostelage of the monks of Arbroath. But that's going away back to the 13th century. The name of the earliest manager of the Cross Keys is known. He was a Peebles Burgess who was supposed to take care of the hostelage of the monks of Arbroath. And he was known as Gwilliam Macion. In modern terms, that's Willie McEwen. He was responsible for providing the monks and their visitors with rushes, comfortable sleeping chambers, sanitation, and candles. That was a big thing then.
Expensive.
Paris candles, they were called. and they were prized, you know, big white candles. They were really prized by the ecclesiastical establishment, and so Willie McEwen had special responsibility for that. Anyway, folks, look, we're going to have to end here.